Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for our event, the last one of the year. Trying to cut to me, Ian, just so I can say hello. Hello, here I am. Brilliant. So, hi, I'm Steve. I'm one of the consultants at Code. We're very keen, I suppose, to reflect on the year in terms of the COVID and the impact it's had on certainly our business and our clients' businesses, and look at how we might place bets a little bit more, a little bit differently in 2021 as that comes around. So, if you can flip back to the content, please, Jan. As an organization, we design and build products for our clients. That means we're sort of making and changing things constantly. And by doing so, placing bets all the time, both big and small. Not only in the front end of the experience where customers make interactions, but also behind the scenes from a technology point of view. And also within the client itself, like, we're doing a lot more coaching now and helping the teams create effectiveness and efficiencies within the things that they do. So yeah, there's 80 of us based out in Manchester, and yeah, these kinds of bets we place all the time, really. And I guess that sense of experimentation is something that we used a great deal this year. As and when we saw the world changing constantly, it was something we leaned on very heavily, and we see it being a big part of next year as well. And in fact, so everyone's placing bets all the time, even you guys, if you're not experimenting live at the moment. Then skip on, please, Jan. I think the reality is that everyone is placing bets every day, whether you think about it or not in those terms. People are placing bets. You're placing bets when you're at work. So today is all around, I suppose, like how do we de-risk those bets? How do we bring them to life and actually make them recognised as experiments, as bets, so that people around us can understand that we are sort of playing with the future a little bit here. We don't quite know what's going to land. Even if we have got great insight, things don't always go to plan. So today we've got some great talks ready from two of our top people. We've got Matt Lacey, who looks after our performance team, which is very much around data and experimentation in the front end. And we've got Jess, who's coming up next, who looks after our UX function. She's going to talk about some of the research methods that she's been using and some of the stuff that you might want to take on next year. So her talk's all about the world is changing, and so are our customers, and now is a great time to think about injecting research into your plans if they're not already. And then Matt will follow on with 4 times experimentation to drive growth. Some themes sort of large and small that he's been using this year, and again, things you can take away and apply next year yourselves. We'll have some questions throughout, so please feel free to stick something in the channel, and we'll talk about some of those at the end. But we're hoping to be quite good on time. We'll try and wrap this up in 45 minutes or so on. I'll let you get on with your morning. But Jess, I'll hand over to you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's cool. So hi, I'm Jess. As Steve said, I'm head of UX at Code Computer Love, which basically means anything that's kind of user research focused. I get involved, look at kind of what are the objectives of what we're trying to learn, get to speak to kind of users, and then use that to kind of build tools to help us make decisions as we go forward. So I would say in kind of my history, I've been doing UX for about 7 years, and predominantly in kind of the research space where I've done hundreds of kind of user interviews, usability tests to help drive kind of product decisions going forward. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of the weird world that we now find ourselves in, and the fact that that's changing, and that means that we need to understand our users better. We need to understand their behaviour. We can't use the things that we've known in the past. So 2020 as a year has spent feeling a little bit like a roller coaster. We don't know where we are, what's coming next, what's just around the corner. It's kind of felt like a bit of an emotional roller coaster for lots of people too, which will really influence the way that they behave, the way that they think. And it's almost like everything in their life has absolutely changed. And just a few examples of that, really. We've gone and completely changed the way that we work in the world. Like, there's lots of people who've gone from working in an office to actually working at home, which brings its own challenges that you have to overcome, and the way that you actually have to respond to things. You've got shopping behavior that's massively changed. People have stopped looking at them big corporates and started kind of looking to locals to try and get the different things that they need in life. And seeing big companies like Arcadia Group gone, that's going to be another thing that's going to drive that kind of approach to local living a lot more as well. And then just thinking about kind of shopping behaviour, people used to shop predominantly little and often, so doing them kind of daily quick shops, whereas COVID's actually got us into a position where we've started to panic buy. There's been no toilet roll or flour or pasta anywhere, so it's completely changed the way that we actually approach our day-to-day kind of shopping as well. From a kind of broader market perspective, everybody used to report on the fact how hard it is to get onto the property ladder, but with stamp duty not being around, that's actually changed all of that. So people are making these bigger purchases, and no one really knows how that's going to affect the economy come March when that ends. And then just from a kind of social perspective as well, people like going out isn't possible anymore. So staying in has become the new thing. I'm sure we've all done plenty of quizzes online where we've all got together and kind of spent time with each other, but that real FaceTime just isn't a thing with people anymore. And that influences what we expect from businesses. So if you think about when you wanted to set up a bank account, you used to go in, you used to have a chat with a financial advisor, they take you through all the application process. But now we're moving to a world where online services are just kind of becoming the expected. We don't want to have to go into a place. We don't want to have to interact with people because there might be a risk. So what can we do to actually interact with people online? So considering all of them behaviours, I thought it was a really good time to actually revisit Maslow's hierarchy of needs and actually thinking about you can't really do a lot of things unless you kind of meet the needs of each tier. And 2020 has literally stripped us from so many of the basic needs that we need before we can even start to look at what we actually want to achieve outside of that. So if you think about the physiological needs, that warmth and food and all water and things, that's all disappeared. Like we don't feel secure in our own homes in case people have lost their jobs. Like there's a lot of factors at play that have actually taken away them basic needs. And then even if you've managed to sustain them, you've then got safety. We're constantly hearing on the news all the time how much of a risk COVID is. It doesn't feel safe to go out. You've got to constantly be thinking about how to keep others safe as well. So that's another need that we're just not kind of hitting right now as humans. And then we're constantly going in and out of lockdowns. We've got tiers and everything else, and we're just missing seeing people. We are human beings. We do want to be a part of a bigger collective, and that all of these things and just like outside of product world are affecting people's decisions and are affecting the way that people actually think about buying things, what they're going to do next, and what kind of services they need access to. So the purpose of this kind of talk is basically to highlight that we can't rely on stereotypes anymore. People's behaviour has completely changed. We have seen it with some of our own clients. So we work with Hillary's Blinds, and one of the things that we've seen over the last year is their demographics have completely changed about who's actually online and who's actually shopping. And it really does mean that we can't just assume that old people cannot use the internet anymore. They absolutely need to in order to access a lot of these services that exist out of there. And when we start to think about, okay, well, how do people actually use the different products and tools that we've got out there? We need to start changing our assumptions about them things as well. You know, everybody used to think that the homepage was the shop window and it's the place that gets people into kind of that experience. But actually, people are much more familiar with Google these days and will land halfway through your website. So how do you lift your brand and elevate that stuff to really get that trust built with users when that's not where they're going? So this is why it's almost a great reason to do research right now, because there's no benchmark, there's no kind of stereotypes that we can use. We just need to understand what complexities people are actually considering, and especially for the target audience that you want to go for, because that could have also changed in this world that's moving on. But I've said why we should and like what are the things that we can find out and what we can do, but actually what happens if we don't? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a case study to go through, and this is the Tropicana story, and I've got the link at the bottom here where you can read the full case study. But just as a highlight, a few years ago, Tropicana went through a bit of a rebrand on their bottles, and without getting into kind of subjective kind of measures around the design, one of some of the key things that actually changed was the Tropicana logo was no longer horizontal across the bottle. It was now going vertical up, which causes readability issues for some people, and especially if you think about that on a supermarket shelving section, you see so many different bottles. You want to be able to be at least recognizable really easily. And also the bottle previously used to demonstrate the orange, which was basically like, it's orange juice, it's really recognizable to people. The design choice on the second bottle that they moved towards was just what could be considered just a yellow liquid, and especially because that was on the 3/4, it's not as recognizable as the orange that would have just been easy to scan your eyes through. So actually what happened out of some of these things that we've just demonstrated is that Tropicana did spend 35 million on marketing for this new bottle and this new campaign that was all about squeezing and getting the natural produce out. But when they actually launched this product on the shelves, they had a 20% loss in sales. So that was a 20 million total missed sale opportunity, and it did get pulled within 30 days. Now, if you go through the article that I've listed, you can find a lot more out about this, but the assumption is that when they were going through this rebranding process and this design process, they didn't actually put that in front of users to get feedback and say, okay, well, which one is recognizable? If you had this in the list of all of them other different brands, which one would you pick up, and that kind of thing. So the assumption here is that by not doing that research, you're taking a bigger risk on whether it's actually going to work, which is why we're trying to encourage you to take that opportunity now to de-risk a world that we have no clue about. So not just why you shouldn't do it, but where we've done it, where we've actually seen this work. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a case study. So last year we worked with Park Christmas Savings, and the objective was kind of two-pronged really. It was to look at how can we get more people actually signing up for the savings program and what can they do with that? And then also, how can we look at keeping them for the second year and actually giving that great experience throughout it? So one of the things we do when we're doing research is to try and really hone in on what is it that we're trying to learn and what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So this is the format that we tend to use. So it's like we are researching the experience of actually setting up and repeating using the service for, and this is where you identify your different user types. Who are they? Who do we need to speak to? Who do we need to understand? And then finally, so that what is the outcome of this stuff? How are we going to make sure that we get the answers that we need to the questions? So it was all about making sure we understood why people actually choose the savings program, why people actually drop out, which was why we spoke to the nil payers, because it's not just good enough to speak to the people who made it through, but actually understanding why people don't, so you can overcome them barriers. And then looking at kind of them people who keep coming back, why is it that they do? What is that real motivator around that stuff, so that we can make a great campaign to keep people going through in the future. So just to talk you through what we did quite a lot of customer interviews. So we tend to try and aim for 5 in each user type, so that was over 3 days. We also did some data analysis, and this was really good because what we were doing was using our researchers in both qual and quant together to actually understand, okay, well, if some users mention some of those things, what can we see in the data? How are we seeing people actually sign up and make payments, and look at all of them things that can correlate, so we can create a much better story. And then basically we use all of that information to create a data journey map, looking at the different drop-offs, looking at the opportunities that we need to kind of solve. And that kind of looks like this on the right. So I've fuzzed out some of the data there, but essentially what we were trying to say is this is the experience that a user goes through, and these are the pages that they potentially see on your website. And when you can see that, then we can start to use that data to say, right, okay, well, we know that there's a drop off here, and we know that that could be potential number of users and sessions lost, which eventually means the amount of revenue lost. And then underneath this stuff, we then also added kind of the frustrations that people said or what we heard, just to kind of add in that why. So not just what's happening, but actually why do we think that exists, so that we can create lots of opportunities around that. And I think from doing this research, what was really interesting to us was that we heard that people thought that this was a big risk, signing up to saving for 12 months when it's all about Christmas, an emotional time of the year, was just like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So what was really interesting was that we heard that for first timers, people would want to not cover all of Christmas, but just kind of that big present. So it's the bigger thing that I need to save for, but at least I can cover the rest of Christmas with my own kind of savings somewhere else. So that was a really interesting kind of proposition that we could look around. And then we also found, like, with the people that we were targeting and marketing to, we were generally going towards families, because that's obviously Christmas, it's that kind of time, it's that emotional pull. But what we actually found was it wasn't the 2.4 family, it was more of these single mums trying to make sure that their kids are getting the best Christmas ever. So again, that emotional tie that we could do with some of the content was something that was really kind of interesting and it makes us talk to people in a different kind of way. And then kind of just the interesting thing for that retention kind of objective that we had, if people had a great experience, people wanted to then include all of Christmas. So it was like, can you give us the Christmas food as well? Can we put everything, all of our eggs into that basket now that we trust you? And that's kind of, it's one of them things where the approach for somebody for the first time can be completely different to somebody the second time. And it's how we utilize that to actually experiment. So I'm not going to read you through all of these, but all of them opportunities that we saw, we started to experiment with. We didn't just launch things because we'd got this insight. We thought, right, okay, well, how do we know? How do we know that these assumptions that we've got from research actually work? And one of them didn't. We thought that it was really emotional, which was actually the role of marketing and not the role of the website when people got there. So it had to be more rational. It had to explain how it works once you get into that I'm ready to sign up kind of mode. And again, that's the different phases of someone's experience. And we kind of did that through everything that we went through. So it was constantly building on that knowledge that we have and making sure that we're de-risking some of the choices that we made and can see and monitor the way that our changes happened. But we haven't stopped. I've got some results there for you on the right, but I think the important message here is just because we've done that kind of discovery piece and then we've done some experimentation, that hasn't stopped. We're constantly still learning about our users. We're constantly trying to understand the ways that they change, what's different this year. And we keep going round in these cycles where it's learn a little bit about them now, test some of them assumptions, validate them things and come fall back on the circle of what we need to know. So it's all about continual research improvement. We need to understand our users and then experiment with the website's performance and see what we can do to optimize them things. So I've listed out a few things here, but research can help you do lots of things. It can help your teams to be more empathetic towards the people that you're actually trying to target and get them to work in a more kind of empathetic mind. But it can also help with content. It can help with your conversion. It could help you tailor an experience. It can even help your brand change its proposition in the way that it goes forward. So you can do so many things. It just comes down to the objective that you're trying to achieve. But the value is that it just gives us confidence in our decisions and it de-risks a lot of our decisions as well. As Steve said earlier, we're always taking a bet. We're always placing bets on everything that we do. This is just a way for us to measure it and pivot as and when we need to. So trying not to use up too much more of your time, just a little bit of our process. So I don't know whether you've heard of the double diamond before, but essentially there's kind of two key areas that we focus on. There's the problem space and really understanding people's needs and the problems that exist. And then there's the solution space, which is a lot about what is the solution actually doing for people? How can we make that work better? But they go through cycles regardless of the two different spaces that exist. So you've got explorative research, which is about finding out lots of different things and trying to really understand what's all of the things that could be happening right now. And then you have validation research, which is basically where we take a few of them things and see whether that is actually true. Just because one person said it means that it could happen to 1,000 people, and maybe 5 people said it in a usability testing session, but only it doesn't happen very often. So it's about that validation and scale and risk around the different types of research that we do. And we do that through many, many different methods. There's just a few on the screen here, but essentially at Code, we have a mixed method approach. So we don't just try to do just kind of customer interviews or just data analysis. We try to combine a lot of them things to give us a better kind of understanding of the way that things work. And this is just a lovely diagram that I found, which kind of demonstrates that. So qualitative research, we hear a lot of time as feedback, is 10 people enough, is 5 people enough, and that is purely there just to uncover as many things as possible. You speak to the types of people that you need and the types of mindsets that you're interested in, but that's about uncovering as many things as possible, and then you use quantitative research to validate some of them things that you heard and engage with a much bigger sample size so that you can actually have confidence in how much that scale actually exists. So I'm nearly done, I promise. But what I hope you will take away from today is that the world is changing. So now is a great time to start that user research and start understanding what's changing about things. Stereotypes just won't do it anymore. We can work off a lot of assumptions, but we should be working out ways to kind of validate them and understand them and much more deeper around people's behaviours today. I hope that you've learned that research helps you to reduce risk, and that if you do use lots of different methods, you can learn a lot of different things and apply them to actually getting the most out of the research that you do. But big kind of thing I want to land on is it's not about doing it all up front. It's not about doing it all in one go. It's about continually building on that understanding, which just means that you need to continually research so that you can continually improve and grow your business to get the most out of it. And that's me. So I'm going to hand you over to Matt, who's going to talk us about how to actually go about experimentation. I hope that's been useful.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jess. Really good to perfect tee up for what I'm going to be talking about in the second half now for the next little while. So I guess just to do a quick introduction, Matt Lacey, Performance Director here at Code, been here kind of 3.5 years or so, and previously started in a range of kind of analytics and user research roles, and kind of moved from there into conversion optimization and have been heading up our kind of conversion and analytics offering for a number of years now. So what I'm going to really talk about for the next little while, 20 minutes or so, is how do we take all of that great and rich customer insight and kind of get value from it. So let me just go. So this is a genuine quote when I was a young user researcher back in kind of 2012 or so, nearly a decade ago, and I was we'd done this research project for a big e-commerce retailer. It was a project we'd worked on for kind of a month or so, and we'd done a load of data work and analysis. We'd spoken to customers and done a lot of research. We'd kind of had them in the labs. We've been speaking to all sorts of different different users of their site. We'd written this report. It's probably ended up being 200 pages long or something ridiculous like that, really, but a real in-depth, thorough piece of research. And we were really proud of it. And we caught up with the client a little while later, and they said it was brilliant. We thought it was a great piece of research. I'm pretty sure it's propping up a door in the office now. So we, to us that felt just like soul destroying. We were crushed. We kind of knew, we could look at the site and we could see that not a lot had changed, and it was a little while on, and it felt like it was just this kind of piece of thing which we'd seen as really valuable, but really was just kind of sitting there. And I think that was something we saw occasionally, that we do this really great insight work, but we weren't quite sure how to get that live on the site and moving forward. The flip side of that, the other frustration that we'd sometimes see, was that we'd create something, we'd see a lot of those changes flooding through into the website when that was, when we see it being a bit more proactive and people being faster to deploy some of the recommendations. But then we had no accurate way of measuring those things, and we could go 6 months down the line and it was really hard to understand or attribute any value to the research we'd done to know what difference those recommendations had made. And that was really when we started moving into conversion optimization, to be able to say, how running experiments and moving faster and measuring those changes would allow us to kind of to understand the value. And so that was kind of my route into conversion, and since then really it's been a bit of a love-hate relationship, and we'll get into that. So when I think of when you think of and hear conversion rate optimization, you might think of kind of constant iteration, fine tuning of the experience, reducing friction, increasing motivation, and classic examples of that type of thing might be thinking about landing page optimization. How do we increase relevance and kind of give people a good experience when they first visit your site? How do we reduce bounce rate for those people that come and immediately disappear because we just haven't clicked or shown them the right information straight away? And then maybe you think about the kind of checkout or kind of lead gen funnel or something like that. How do we kind of root out usability issues, improve trust, and keep people moving through? And I think that there's still very much a mindset around conversion optimization that it's really about kind of we're plowing a load of people into the site and we're spending a lot on media and we're putting all that effort into driving them through. How do we just drive efficiency through a website? And that's true and that's valid. I think probably since I started doing conversion, that's been true, but has also felt a bit limiting in the sense that I've always felt that experimentation could offer more than just moving people a bit more efficiently from page to page. So what we're seeing now and what we're hearing about over the last few years, and nobody's kind of settled on, there doesn't seem to be any consensus on how these types of things move forward, but we're seeing a lot of trends around broader business experimentation, whether that's customer experience optimization, whether that's growth hacking. We're seeing lots of different kind of terms. And maybe even just, where we've been thinking about looking at our service design, mapping, looking at that, as Jess showed earlier on for that example from Park, as we map the whole service much wider than just the website, how could we start to think about running experiments all the way across that journey? So we're going to look at 4 types of experiments. The first one is old faithful, really, and saying actually good quality CRO experiments are still just as valid as they were in 2012. Actually, getting some insight and going through a process properly, is still a really valuable, activity. And so having a good process for that is really important. So starting with really clear objectives, knowing what we're trying to achieve. Sometimes that would be, e-commerce sales or leads, but sometimes there might be other objectives, whether that's reducing calls to a contact center and trying to save some, kind of operational efficiency, something like that. But being clear about objectives, doing all the right research, and whether that's a blend of kind of UX methods, analytics research, and different kind of expert reviews, generating a wide range of hypotheses and having the right methodology to prioritize and select the right ideas, and then move those through design, development, and getting them live as A/B tests, and making sure that we do all the wrap up and analysis afterwards to take that learning forward, look at what we can iterate again, what we should implement, and how we can continue learning about how customers behave and how our designs, our products, our journeys influence those behaviors. So some examples of that, I won't go into loads of detail on these because I'm sure you've seen similar kind of things, but we were working with car finance last year, and most of their traffic was coming into a small number of landing pages, and actually we knew that there was some kind of experiments we could run without going into huge big build cycles, where we could start to learn more about what was working and address some customer issues or feedback. So we started off with our research, and one of the things we learned straight away from speaking to customers was that the type of customers that they would see using their offering most often might be in a category where they're worried about their credit score. They might be, have different types of financial products and services, and really kind of each time they go onto different websites, they're doing their research, they're worried that it's going to impact it. And so just adding a simple line of copy into the call to action below the apply now thing, saying no impact on your credit score, that actually had a small increase in conversion, and we saw that just that small change was able to deal with a real user pain and start to improve that and keep them moving through. And equally, we then started to look at, we had this on the left, you can see the kind of orange Fiesta. We started to think, well, that kind of matched with the kind of values that people were searching for initially, but we wanted to understand, a range of different things, really. Like, how does the orange and the prominence with the button, how does that work? Would having a more aspirational brand, so moving from a Ford to Mercedes, we change it, different color schemes, even just the kind of aspect and positioning of it, how does that influence people's perception of the page, of the service, of the journey that they're about to go on. And again, that was able to deliver a good uplift, not a massive uplift, but actually what really we're seeing here is lots of small changes adding up. So another quick example, this is from one of our from Bupa, who we worked with for a number of years now, and you can see that actually this is a page that worked really well on mobile, and for their consumer proposition, where most of the people were coming on mobile, worked really well. But this is actually the business page and the business quote journey, and when we look at it on desktop, it just isn't well optimized for desktop. And we know that the majority of business users actually tend to be coming on a desktop device during working hours. So we looked at that page, we did a bit of a redesign. There's no rocket science here, really. I think if we're, as we're looking at it, we've improved the usability of the form. We've made it nice and kind of streamlined and straightforward. We've added it kind of field level validation, and also we've brought up some of those kind of trust badges around de facto and Trustpilot, and just kind of a well-designed page that does its job as it should. It's at the bottom of the kind of complexity scale in terms of some of the experiments we'd run, but can still be really valuable. So I think that the lesson really is that kind of that classic conversion optimization, looking at how do we identify barriers, reduce friction, increase motivation, is still really valid. And actually, we love the idea of these big disruptive ideas, but actually, most often progress is made by the cumulative effect of lots of small changes. So that's type 1, but probably moving on. I think I don't want to diminish the value of that, but I also want to promote the value really of kind of business experimentation. So I think kind of CRO can quite often mean that the types of experiments we run are limited to in kind of scope and focus. So I think the type of business experiments that we think are going to drive a lot of growth next year help us to answer and validate some of our more fundamental business questions. So whether that's around the products we offer, what people are willing to pay, how we use our resources effectively, all sorts of uncertainty and risk, we can start to use business experiments to address those. So the first thing that's really important for that is to make sure we've got a clear and simple view of strategy. And it sounds like a really obvious thing, but it's not always quite as easy. We use this on quite a lot of onboarding workshops with new clients, and spend probably half an hour just to really quickly map out key parts of the business model and make sure that we understand that before we think about where we focus and where we optimize. And it's not always really easy to simply and quickly articulate what our key value propositions are, who our customers are, and how that might be changing or evolving, and so on. So having a tool like this is really valuable because it allows us to get everything down and start validating and testing. And the other area and tool that we think about is these kind of 3 fundamental business hypotheses or categories of hypothesis. Effectively, the desirability hypothesis, which is, do people want this? The viability hypothesis, which is, should we be doing this? Does it commercially stack up from a business point of view? And feasibility, can we actually deliver what we're saying we're going to deliver and offer? So really what I want to suggest is that these 2 tools work hand in hand, and actually we can run experiments in each of these 3 areas. So in terms of desirability experiments, you can see in the top right there, it maps to that kind of top right of the business model canvas. But things like, are there new channels that we could be testing? Should we be targeting a new niche market? If you think about the way that Apple grew, they started with some very specific niche markets like education, design studios, photographers, filmmakers, and then actually used those positions to move out to a mass market. But we've also seen success recently of kind of mass market brands actually choosing new niches and really dialing in there and upping the quality and the way that they talk to those. And so, that could be about new community communication strategy, new audiences. I think there's a lot of talk over the last few years about businesses starting to prioritize personalization, and while we can use clever tools and try and identify new segments, actually thinking more strategically about new audiences and new propositions and targeting those to the right people probably is going to be as effective, or if not a lot more effective, in terms of, you know, personalizing and increasing relevance, rather than just trying to kind of work with a generic product and personalize it to new audiences. So there's a range of different types of experiment we can run around desirability. And so a quick example of that for an automotive client that we work with, they had a kind of process where people might go and look for a car on the website, go into the dealership, go kind of offline in a sense. Then they might have a conversation and be speaking and dealing with finance. And then obviously once they made a purchase, there's a whole range of kind of servicing and various other conversations that might happen. And that was all very kind of disconnected and siloed in their world. And so one of the things that we kind of worked with one of our partners on is about how could we actually change the customer relationship and start to centralize that customer relationship through a new piece of technology, a new product that would bring all of that together, make it a much more seamless process to go from web to dealership to sort out your finance, to then book your services and so on, and bring that all together. So an experiment whereby building a new product and starting with an MVP, we've got a whole new range of opportunities to completely transform the customer relationship. Then thinking secondly about the feasibility experiments. So these ones are much more around what can we technically do, what can we offer as a product, how could we change our products and services. So running regular tech spikes, thinking about new ways that we could integrate data to maybe activate it differently. So that might be thinking about using web data with back-end customer data, maybe linking that up with media data, to try and understand how we could maybe retarget more intelligently, or how we can maybe change, update our emails and things like that differently. Thinking about how we might change customer support and how we deal with the communications we have with customers, whether trying new methods. So I know for a number of years now, certain brands have been using kind of video chat. Now that's something that maybe a couple of years ago might work with certain audiences, but there might be large ranges of people that weren't comfortable to do that in an e-commerce situation. But actually it might be that now, in the last year, when everybody's kind of up to their capability, everyone's got really comfortable with using video chat, it might be that a tool like that could be something that would be really effective now. So an example of where we're thinking about this type of approach really is we're working with an insurance client where the way it works at the moment is you have the kind of brochure content and information about the journey up front. Then you move into a kind of quote and buy journey. At the moment, you get a kind of rough guide price based on a few answers that you put in, but it's not a final or kind of very accurate price. That then leads to a call and maybe a series of calls with the sales team. And actually, once you join up or sign up, you'd end up receiving your paperwork in the post, and you don't quite have to fax it back, but feels like that kind of approach. And when we're in a kind of digital world, we probably know that the future for these types of services is to move to an all digital service. But what we're doing with them at the moment is starting to kind of work out what type of experiments we could run, how we could bring some of their systems together and some of their technology together to just move into that next step of providing an accurate price, validating that assumption that we think that's going to be really important for how people use their service. And actually that will help us move in that general direction of moving to an all digital service. So the last section from me really briefly is the viability experiment. So thinking about how could we experiment with pricing? How could we think about different tiers? Maybe at the moment there'll be a new appetite for a kind of no frills pricing model. I think kind of if you think about, saw a really interesting discussion the other day about IKEA and how they're like the biggest furniture retailer in the world. If you ask their users what they want in the store, they'd probably say that they want better service, they want more staff on the floor. But actually what they really come to IKEA for a lot of the time is price. And so actually, you know, if they had to weigh up the choice between having extra people on the floor or having to pay substantially more for the furniture, they probably have that. So that, you know, actually recognizing now that no frills pricing might be a really compelling offer right now. But one of the clients we're working with, thinking about, you know, revenue streams, they're an e-commerce retailer who's been growing rapidly for a number of years. But actually what they're thinking about at the moment is with the change in people's behavior and online kind of meetings and groups and courses, actually now might be a really good time for them to diversify into new revenue streams, and in a way that's linked to their e-commerce offering, but actually is kind of, you know, a really helpful diversification, which is going to drive their growth. And then actually maybe thinking about new markets as well. And so these combinations of new revenue streams and experiments in new areas are going to be what drives their growth. So last couple of thoughts from me, really. Firstly, I think the general approach of treating your experiments like a venture capitalist portfolio, the idea being that if you run 10 experiments, there might be 1 or 2 of them that are going to give you a big return. There might be another 2 or 3 which give you a reasonable or good return, and kind of give you some positive results, and there'll be some that don't work. And if we're only testing things that we know are going to work, then actually we're kind of missing some of the value of genuine experimentation. And you know, the companies that are most successful will have you know, a graveyard of great ideas that turned out that the market wasn't ready, or that customers didn't want them, or it wasn't the right timing, or they weren't positioned in the right way. So I think really the kind of closing thoughts really is that it's still absolutely valid to keep going with those kind of traditional conversion experiments of looking at removing friction, increasing motivation, delivering a great digital experience, and tracking people from, you know, from their kind of acquisition and media journeys through the journey, and looking at where we can problem solve. But likely the bigger driver of business growth next year is going to be around how can we be more agile and run bigger business experiments, and really having a balanced portfolio. If we know that we rely on just changing the desirability stuff, and we never really get round to the feasibility or viability, try and be intentional next year about creating some room, creating a plan that allows us to balance different types of experimentation. And really the general best approach for this is to place lots of small bets and focus on speed. It's really easy to get bogged down in a big business experiment which takes 18 months, and so wherever we can avoid red tape, avoid you know, kind of tricky constraints that slow us down, you know, that sets us off in the best way. So yeah, hopefully that's a useful summary, and I think we've got a couple of questions from people.
Thanks, Matt, that was terrific. Thank you. And Jess, that's brilliant. A couple of questions. We're at time, guys, so we'll be brief, but we can't possibly ignore this question from Jackie, who's one of our friends. The question reads: how are you managing customer research, Jess, with the current restrictions? Any difficulties, and how are you overcoming? So over to you.
So there's a few different things that we're doing at the moment. We've had to get much more digital with our tools that we use. So we've started to use something called Lookback, which allows us to basically do them remote kind of interviews. And I think one of the key things for us was making sure that we could still do that mobile kind of usability testing as well as desktop, because obviously all these tools that we have allow you to share your screen, but not really on a mobile. So we've found a tool that enables us to do that, but an interview's always been pretty much the same thing. It's a conversation, so whether that's over the phone or whether that's face to face, we essentially can get the same amount of information out of people by just having a conversation with them. I would say the bits that we've missed out on a little bit is the contextual observation, which is another kind of validation method that we use post interviews. So we can actually observe people in their space, and that's not something that we can do at the moment, but we've always relied on interviews as a good kind of insight, and then used experimentation to validate them assumptions afterwards. So we've got equipped with the tools to manage that kind of remote research now, and it just means that we can run it pretty much exactly the same as we used to before. Hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Jess. That's great. I'm going to ask one more question because I can. A good one, I think, maybe for those listening. But how do I persuade my boss to look at experimentation in 2021? So who wants to take that one, Matt or Jess?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think my key thought on this one really is that I think almost goes back to Steve's point from the introduction, really, that we are making bets all the time, and I think sometimes the biggest change is a mindset shift to actually approach them as experiments and think about documenting them as experiment, trying to think intentionally about what the hypothesis is, what we're hoping to learn by running that, how we measure it effectively. I think quite often we'll make business changes or effectively make changes, but not think of them as an experiment, not measure them in the right way, and then afterwards we'll really wish that we'd kind of had that rigor and that process in place. So I think that probably two things. One is about the mindset shift and thinking about, how can we run experiments, and the second part is just coming back to having that broad rounded view of like, what are all the biggest opportunities in different areas, and how can we start to kind of come up with lots of ideas that will give us the few best ideas to experiment and keep them small.
So ask the boss for a bit of cash, basically, I've heard there, Matt. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds like what you heard, I'm sure.
Yeah, just a little bit, not too much, but yeah, you got to go there with something small that you think's got to have a good return, and then like prove that it works, and then go from there, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Something like that. Okay, great. Terrific. Right, I think we're at time and more. So I've really enjoyed hosting today. I hope you've really enjoyed the two talks that we've put together. It's been a funny old year. I think we've all got through it though, by hook or crook, and hopefully you've heard something in this content that would help you to use experimentation yourselves next year in a proactive way, and maybe think about the role in which design, UX, technology, data sort of plays within the organization, and maybe elevate it to the board table if it isn't already there. Here's some of our handles, so you're more than welcome to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn and various other places. There is another event planned in January for those who would like another spin of the roulette wheel, just to carry on the metaphor. I think it's in. Can you skip that forward, Ryan? I can't see it change on my screen, but nevertheless, it's around trends. There we go. So it's a trends piece, really. So what does 2021 mean to the organizations that we deal with? We're going to be talking alongside Hillary's, who are going to talk about some of their plans for 2021 and how they have learned from 2020 in terms of agility and reacting to the market and the customer needs, such that they can plan perhaps with change in mind for how the year progresses, because again, it's going to be tricky for us all to understand quite where 2021 will head. So agility is the key, I think, and it's going to be good to hear from Hillary's how they plan to go about doing that. So that's it from me. I hope you've had a really good time with this, and on behalf of Code, have a great Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year.